Okay, let's start. I'd like to welcome officers and members of the public. I don't think there are many public here, but there may be some watching at home in attendance for the first meeting of the new Communities, Environment and Highways Select Committee. I will read out the fire alarm, but I'm not sure it's appropriate, but we'll still go for it. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, everyone present is asked to exit out of the Ashcombe Suite, walk down the corridor, turn right down the stairs and out of the front entrance of County Hall. Please disperse to Kingston Town Centre for 30 minutes unless there are signs that the alarm is a drill. In line with our guidance on the use of social media, I am happy for anyone attending today's meeting, including members of the Council, to use social media, provided this does not disturb the business of the meeting. Please note that today's meeting is being broadcast live via the Council's internet site as part of our webcasting facility. Can I please ask committee members, and that includes myself, and any officers presenting to speak clearly and directly into the microphones. Please ensure that your mobile phones are turned to silent. So we now move on to agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. I've had apologies from Councillor Jan Mason and also from Mike Goodman, Cabinet Member for Environment and Transport. The second, declaration of interest. All members are present are required to declare at this point in the meeting or as soon as possible thereafter, 1, any disclosable pecuniary interest, and or 2, other items, either interests arising under the Code of Conduct in respect of any items of business being considered at this meeting. Do I have any? No, I don't. Thank you very much. Questions and petitions? None have been received. So we move on to the first substantive item of the agenda, which is update from the Waste Task Group, and very fortunate to have Dr. Andrew Povey and Alan and Jason Russell to update us on the progress they've made. Before we go to that, I appreciate Jason would be with us. As we all know, Jason is soon to be leaving the Council, and it would be, I think, the wish of all of us, particularly myself, to say what a fantastic job Jason has done in service of the Council and our residents. We'll be desperately sorry to see him go. Wish him all the very best in the future, but he's been a really true servant of Surrey and its residents. Right, so let's start perhaps, no formal written paper, that doesn't matter, but Andrew would be very interested for you to tell us where you are so far and maybe initial ideas and recommendations, and we can then open it up for comments and questions.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, colleagues. I thought just very, very briefly, just to set the context, Chairman, that the Council, as everybody knows, has a huge amount of money to save, and as part of that savings, the original proposal was to close the 4 smallest CRCs. But at the February Cabinet meeting, I think very much because of the public reaction to that, I think we learnt just how popular they are, in fact. The Cabinet decided to pause on that and to set up this task group, and that we are to report back in time for the September Cabinet meeting when that decision can be visited again. The terms of reference, the task group, which I hope were circulated to you as part of the papers, in a way they divide up, I think, into 3 distinct parts. The first one is, can we find some actual savings in terms of the current operation of the CRCs? Secondly, can we improve on the recycling rate overall in the county? And thirdly, to take a more strategic view across the whole waste and recycling area of the Council's activities, and particularly in light of the DEFRA consultation document that came out earlier in the year, and in fact I think that consultation is now closed off, but that's particularly looking at things like the deposit return scheme, which you will have heard about a lot in the press. It might set some rules for the districts and borough, the collection authorities, as to how they collect waste, and a whole raft of other things. But the main principle of the DEFRA consultation is to improve recycling and to start people thinking a bit more about the circular economy. And I think what to me comes out of that is that the very phraseology that I think we've used in Surrey for many years, which is reduce, reuse, recycle, and I'm not sure how many years that's been going, but I think that still has stood the test of time. And I think in terms of this particular project, it's actually better to start at kind of that end and say, well, look, strategically, I think the task group, I hope will agree, and there are two members of the task group here actually, that really, the starting point is to reduce waste, reuse as much as possible, and recycle. And indeed, if you start at that end and say that's what we want to encourage as a council, and indeed in terms of financial savings, there's no question that the largest savings would come from reducing the amount of waste or increasing recycling. So, and those, we're talking there possibly of millions of pounds rather than, perhaps starting at the other end and saying, we can shave a few 100,000 off the cost of a CRC. So I think the strategic side really says to you, we want to be encouraging reuse and encouraging recycling. And I think I'm right in saying that, for instance, on the food waste collection, we're nothing like at 100%, we're more like 50 to 60%. And therefore, just on that one item, the potential savings are quite a few £1 million if you could get that up to a much higher figure. So I think that's where that we should be starting. In terms of the work of the task group so far, we've had one set of visits. We had a day set of visits. Not everybody could come on. But I think what two things struck me about that. One, that the difference in scale on the CRCs. So if you look at Warlingham or Cranley, which are the two very small ones, and sort of what they can do and the size of them and the scope of them, compared to the Charlton Lane with the Eco Park, and just the absolute scale of it is just phenomenally different. And so I think when you start talking about CRCs, one's just got to have that perspective that there is such a range of size. So I think we have got a few ideas around small savings around the CRCs, but I think those are, as I say, the more detailed stuff. And if you really want to, if you really start from the point of wanting to increase reuse and recycling and minimise waste, then I think one good example of the work that Mike has done, Mike Woodman, is with the reuse shops, which there's a good one at Charlton Lane, and the enthusiasm of the staff for these is absolutely fantastic, because they're actually picking out things from the waste that has been brought that they think could be sold in the shop, and these are, I think, really quite successful. So I think the thrust and the themes going forward have got to be about encouraging reuse, encouraging recycling. And I think, therefore, from the point of view of our residents, we have to make it easy for them. I think, many people are not so sort of, shall we say, fanatical about it, or so keen on it, enthusiastic about it. So we have to make it easy. And I think that says that you need to keep the CRCs and develop them to make them something that people recognise a bit more as a place for recycling, for helping the environment, and rather than the kind of route that, I think unintentionally the council has almost said, we're not exactly making it more difficult for you, but well, we are in some ways because we're charging. And we're saying, well, if you come up with a mixture of black bag rubbish and recyclable, you might even get sent away because you haven't separated them out. So I think, we do need a slight change of tack, I think, in terms of encouraging what we actually want, which is reduction, reuse and recycling. And I think I'll stop there, Jim. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew, very much indeed. And aware, as you've said, that Becky and Jonathan are also members of the group. So very briefly, if they would like to add anything to what Andrew has said, now's the time. So Becky first, and I don't know if Jonathan would like to add something. Up to the floor.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just to build on what Andrew said, I mean, I don't think we can emphasise enough how deeply unpopular the decisions that have been made, how they've been received in the local areas where the recycling centres were threatened with closure. And those feelings as well came through on the days where we received evidence from the local district councils and parish councils, mainly from those affected areas. And I think what's also quite clear is that the 4 areas that were identified for closure, they've all got their very specific needs and differences as well, so we can't really treat them in one blanket approach. So, we're definitely looking at all of that. Just to add to the point about saving money, there's a radio advert playing in my area at the moment about using more of the food caddies and how that would save us 3 million as a council. So if you compare the 3 million to the 600,000 that we're trying to save, I know where I'd prefer to put my efforts and emphasis so that we can still keep the facilities open for the local residents that would like to go and use them. Because I receive a lot of phone calls in my area about recycling, the general frustration about being able to take various bags of mixed rubbish and being sent away with it, questions about where it should go, and the environmental impact of the extended travel that people are being asked to take to get their rubbish to another recycling centre. I know that we were going to introduce charges on wood, but they haven't been introduced, so one question is, well, can we therefore reintroduce wood recycling at the recycling centres that it was taken away from? Where are people supposed to take their large bulky waste? We can't just leave people with no option. So yes, let's focus on where we can make the massive savings, and then perhaps we can keep some of the other facilities open so that people in all corners of Surrey, and Wallingham as an example is in the very far north-east part of Surrey, and people there would like recycling options as well as anybody else. Thank you.
Jonathan.
Thanks. I'd say we did spend one day visiting a whole number of the different sites, and I would reiterate the point that Andrew made about they aren't all the same. It's not, we've got lots of CRCs and we might close some of them. The difference between the one in Bagshot, for example, and the one in Shepperton, absolutely huge. We talked about them being reuse and recycling centres going forward, and very much focusing on what they're for and where they might go into the future, and having a clearer vision for that. Currently all the wood that is at those sites tends to get sent away for incineration, but we talked about the potential to separate that out. All the fridges and freezers brought there, regardless of whether they are broken or just the older version that's been replaced by the newer version, are sent away for recycling. Whereas a simple question when one arrives at a site is, can this be reused, is it still in working order, would free up a lot of those potentially to go to charities or homes that need these appliances that maybe can't afford them here in Surrey. We talked about the need maybe to rationalise some of the sites. The Bagshot site wasn't in an ideal location. I think we talked about the sites in Wallingham and Caterham having very little scope for real change about what happened there, because they're both quite small. But residents would much prefer to see those sites close if they already saw a new combined site already open, and that we should start by the plan for what's going to replace them rather than start by by closing things. And, a thing that's come to me the last couple of days is the programmes on TV with Hugh Hugh on TV talking about where recycling ends up and the real public concern to make sure that when they recycle something, it's really recycled. So I think there is more work that we can do in terms of the communication side. So if we give people the confidence that that we are doing a really good job on recycling and all the stuff that they give to us to be recycled gets recycled and the public gets behind us, could go a long way. Comments you made about food waste, separation and increasing the revenues from that. We also talked about how segregating out the paper, which is the highest value item at the doorstep, could also make millions of pounds. But that when then tips into discussions about the different boroughs and districts and making sure they don't go off on their own and procure new contracts with outside providers, but that we have the opportunity not to be locked out of working together, but we can work together across the county, but not at the lowest common denominator, but setting out a vision for what the best in class across Surrey might be.
We go to other questions. I'll just start, if I may, quickly. I think I heard you say that even at this early stage that your group is going to be recommending no closures of CRCs, and that's an important message before we even start. My question, though, is absolutely we want to make the big bucks, if you like, through increasing reuse and increasing recycling, but to a quite a significant extent before big monies start to bear. The question is how. It's an aspiration, absolutely, but the devil of this is the detail. How does this council, or with boroughs and districts or others, how do you actually make it happen? And does the task group have any specific ideas of how to realise that ambition?
I think there's several routes, Chairman. One, I think the reuse shops have been extended. I mean, that's one that's quite new, and we're talking, I think, of a few £100,000 a year savings, plus the fact that you're taking materials out of the waste stream. So just, in terms of sales, there's a certain amount of money, but also you're taking those things out, so you're not getting the charge for waste. So that's relatively new. I think Jonathan mentioned the bike scheme, which any old bikes that come in are sent down to a prison on the south coast for refurbishment and then subsequent resale. There's no reason why that couldn't be extended, I think, to other things. I think we've also picked up a theme in general, and I think a lot of that stems from things Jonathan has said to us about working better with the voluntary sector in terms of reuse of things. And I think there's a theme there that we perhaps want to develop a bit more. I think in terms of the waste, the food waste, like Becky, I've heard it on my local radio station as well. There's obviously quite a bit of publicity about that at the moment. But I think when you really get down and drill down into that one, it is up to the districts and boroughs, through the waste partnership that we have together with the county, to sometimes physically get a person visiting a block of flats and talking to people, and particularly with things like blocks of flats, where it can be quite difficult to, how to just engineer it so that it's easy for people to do. Is there a common big hopper something, or on the basement or whatever. So I think there's some very practical work to be done at that sort of level as well, and I think that can produce results.
Okay, Keith first.
Only briefly, Chairman, because you must have read my notes. My first question was how. And as has been said, a lot of this is aspirational. I think that the reuse shops have been a good innovation, but are there plans to have those extended to other CRCs? The lack of recycling, the lack of food caddy use, comes down, surely, to individual residents who are not doing it. And therefore, through the districts and boroughs, through the operatives that collect the waste every week or fortnight, is it possible, in a nice way, I don't mean big state, big brother way, but in a nice way, identify those who are not recycling very much or not using their food ready, and at least put some information through those people's letterboxes saying, do you realise what could be achieved if you take part? So it would be the encouragement of individuals who are not participating to do so or to do a bit more. So that is really, I think, the essence of it. The point that Becky Rush made, and has been echoed by others, is that unfortunately, whenever there are proposals to change services, which means closing or cutting services, people are always, nothing wrong with it, but they are always parochial. I have not had a single adverse comment received about the closure of the 4 CRC sites because it doesn't affect my locality. Those councillors who represent those areas will have been inundated over the last few months, including Councillor Bovey and Becky Rush and others, and therefore it's a matter of locality-led protest for perfectly understandable reasons. Now, if we are to retain those 4 CRCs, how are they going to add to what can be done on this aspirational project of getting more recycling, more reuse? And I entirely agree, actually, with what was said by Jonathan just now. Residents would be far more amenable if, instead of the message being, we've got to save money, we're going to close your local CRC site because it costs money, they'd be far more amenable if the council were to come forward with a project to say, look, these 2 sites are within X miles of each other, they're pretty small, they don't do as much as they could be doing, so we're going to open a new CRC site there and then close those other 2. It may not be quite as convenient for you guys, for everybody, but it's replacing hopefully a better facility with 2 mediocre facilities. And I think that sort of approach could receive support, but it needs the investment and the money and the will to be able to do it in that part of the county.
I take your point about the 4 particular CRCs are obviously of concern to those 4 members and the residents in those 4 areas. But the more general point about if you can increase food waste up from 50%, say, to 60% and save £2 or £3 million, that's affecting everybody because that's on the council tax bill, if you like, or lack of a council tax bill rise because you've made those sorts of savings. So that does have a much wider applicability. On the reuse shops, yes, I think we're opening a 5th. I'll let Alan just confirm that in a minute, if I may. And the idea is that the smaller CRCs that can't actually have a reuse shop because they haven't got the space will still set aside things that they spot that can go to one of the other reuse shops. So again, it's got a wider applicability rather than the actual 4 or 5 with a shop. And do you want to just make a point about the food waste as well?
So yes, just to clarify on the reuse, currently Suez do in effect mop up potential reuse items from all the sites and then bring them to the 4 reuse shops that we have currently. I think as part of the work of the task group, one of the interesting challenges, and it is an investment decision ultimately, is whether reuse has to take place co-located with a CRC. So could we find other ways of creating reuse shops that stand alone from CRCs? The argument would be potentially yes, but there's an investment need and then it's about finding the right location to get the footfall. So it's not a foregone conclusion. In terms of the engagement with the district and boroughs, the work of the Surrey Environmental Partnership, or as was the Waste Partnership, will have an annual programme of work. Within that programme of work will be a series of campaign-led projects, and they will typically try and target, based on the use of data that comes through the performance reporting from each of the districts, where we need to be concentrating our efforts. So, the flats recycling has been a big push. That has been successful. It's starting to generate recycling areas where there hasn't been recycling, and it's grabbing the attention nationally. It's winning awards, and other boroughs and counties are coming to us to ask the questions about how we do that. And in terms of communications, we just have to continue to repeat the message, because it is confusing. The government strategy has indicated that they want to see changes that will streamline how collections are made, with the view that it becomes simpler, but we still don't know quite the details yet, and there will be a period of transition. So we can't rest on our laurels while we wait for that to happen, hence why the Surrey Environmental Partnership continues to kind of look at ways of engagement and that will drive up participation. So I hope that helps, Chair.
Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me, in terms of a lot of the transformation policies that we've adopted, that from time to time we go into a policy of savings without considering whether the pain that's caused actually is proportionate to the amount of savings that we've made. And it's always seemed to me that our policy on closure of CRCs is one of those. And I'm very relieved to hear, as your remarks today, Mr. Chairman, that it's likely that your recommendation will be that we retain those centres. The other area that exercises the public is this one of charging for certain types of refuse, regardless of where it comes from. Now, it seems to me that the bulk of our problem probably comes from commercial operators trying to use the tips for a cheap offload of their rubbish. There are also domestic work going on. A chap doing a bit of DIY who has a bit of commercial, a bit of chargeable rubbish as a result, which probably wouldn't be a great effort for us to absorb, but which would if we didn't charge for it, would greatly ease the process that we're involved in. I just wonder whether there is a possible way of differentiating between commercial chargeable rubbish, which we really don't want, and domestic chargeable rubbish, which would ease things a lot.
So the issue is really about enforcement. The sites currently, we are introducing van permits for commercial activities. There will always be a bit of a grey area in terms of, how can I put it, unscrupulous users that will look to bend and break those rules. And we work constantly with Suez as our operators to try and identify where that happens. The issue around chargeable waste, it is governed by legislation. So, we are acting within our powers to do so. But that is under review as well as part of the government strategy. I think they do recognise that that's another area where does DIY suddenly become commercial creates a grey area that gets exploited. So they have said that they will be looking at that again as part of their consultation process.
And I think in terms of the task group, we haven't really addressed that one yet. I mean, in the sense of getting down to the detail of do we want to continue charging for these items or not. We've got the principle of wanting to encourage recycling and all the things that, we've said already this afternoon, but getting down to that level of do we want to continue charging and all that, and in light of, let's say what the officer has just said as well. Yeah.
If I may come back, Mr. Chairman, at the risk of wasting your time if it's something that's outside your remit, I've always understood that the problem was one of enforcement. And of course, it's easy enough, isn't it, if a large commercial operator turns up in a tip-up, you know who you're dealing with. The problem is, and I've seen it in neighbours working, that if the builder takes rubble from his van and puts it in his car and turns up, how do you know? Maybe we should be prepared to waive the border lines a little bit in order to facilitate our residents' discontent, and certainly by keeping a record of the cars that turn up and the number of times they turn up, you could perhaps ameliorate the problem in that way.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most people have said everything that I wanted to say. In particular, Becky, completely agree with everything that she said there. I think that the recent rethink on CRCs, I have to say, as a relative newcomer to this council, it's encouraging actually that the council are prepared to rethink these things and go back on certain decisions and think them more carefully through. There was an enormous amount of discussion, particularly on social media, about this particular subject. And I took a lot of flack on it myself. So I am delighted, actually, that that there has been a rethink and this thing is being taken very seriously. There's the common, I suppose, view that our policies on community recycling centres can have a negative impact on fly tipping, for instance. And it's obvious that that is the case. However, I do believe that most residents, most law-abiding residents, wouldn't do it. However, the decision on wood, I think residents would actually burn it in their garden. And the environmental impact on particularly on air quality, if people are going to be encouraged to do that, basically what I'm saying is we need to look at the compatibility of our decisions with other environmental policies and and aims, because I don't think they always tie up. So we really do need to consider those things carefully. Thank you.
Very quickly, if I just respond, I think to take a more kind of holistic look in terms of of the whole thing. If you do something to CRCs, does fly tipping increase, etc.? And if you say you've got to charge for wood, is that going to deteriorate the air quality? Exactly. You've got to take a more rounded approach. I agree with you completely. Yeah.
Starting with a moan, I'm fed up to the teeth of asking, can you sort out the closing times of the CRC? For argument's sake, Rounders Lane. People keep coming up to me saying, blooming shame it's been closed. And when I work it out, they've always gone on a Friday, which means they've gone down a 100-yard little lane and then have to try turning around amongst all the trucks, because no one will put a sign up at the beginning of the road saying, closed Friday, for public, if you like. And I said it over and over and over, and everybody just ignores it. For crying out loud, how hard is it to get that done? And the other thing is, on the way through, and it may be the same with all the others, if you want to go to the shop, you have to go up and go all the way around the system in the queue, past all the cars trying to dump all their stuff, come down and park where you started from. Why can't they just take out 4 bollards and let you go across to dump your batteries and your fridges and stuff, and that's where they want you to park for the shop? How many times I will keep saying this one and asking and asking and asking. Now, the next one is, how many of our CRCs, I don't need the answer straight off, how many CRCs have we got that are on our borders, and how have we got CRCs just the other side of the borders, where we could come to some specific arrangement, which I'd be quite interested in? And the other one is, how much do we do to work with the neighbouring councils as far as the disposal and getting the best price for all our recyclables? I've not really ever heard that addressed.
The last one I'm going to ask Alan to answer. But in terms of your first points about the times that they're open, etc., and how to get to the reuse shop, I think that comes back to the overall theme that if we want to encourage reuse and recycling, then we've got to make all these things easy. I know I've been asked by people which days is such and such open, because they've assumed now, because I'm chairman of the task group, I have all this information in my head, and I have to say that look on the website, and I think you'll find the website is kept up to date, so it's the best thing to refer people to in terms of like opening times. But in terms of around the borders, I mean, yes, it has an effect, because I know people in Cranley sometimes they say it's better to go to the Horsham one, which is just over the border. But I don't know whether there's any official liaison. I think I might have to ask Alan or Jason to answer that.
We don't track numbers per se in terms of the number of visitors. But increasingly what you're finding, not just in this area but across the country, is that permit schemes are being introduced to in effect stop the cross-border movement of waste, unfortunately. In terms of the disposal costs, all the waste that goes through the CRCs and is collected through the district and borough arrangements is handled through the Suez contract. So we're into, I think, year 20 now of a 25-year PFI. So we don't have complete licence to go out and test that regularly, but we do have provisions within the contract to what we call benchmark the prices that we pay. And obviously as we're coming to the end of the PFI contract and 2024 still sounds a long way away, we are starting work now to kind of consider how we drive value out of future disposal arrangements. You know, is that with a similar contract? Is it with a different contract? Is it separating out the different elements so that we are driving value wherever we can through the procurement arrangements?
With just another bit on that. If, is it called Suez, let's say they don't get a good price, how does that affect us? What advantages of us, of them working with their neighbours and getting a good or bad price? How does that contract affect us?
The contract costs to us are primarily driven through the cost of investment in the infrastructure, which is the eco park. So a lot of our costs are not capped, but kind of fixed because of that arrangement. We have agreed a price with Suez, and they are responsible for handling our waste. And if the markets are kind of going against Suez, we're covered against that. On the flip side, we do have arrangements in place to share some of those benefits when the prices move in our favour, and that's why we have been able to drive out costs from the contract. So although we've had a difficult 12 months looking at the £1 million savings that we're trying to drive out of the CRC proposals, I think it's also worth reminding this committee that in previous years, I think, Jason, we've driven out about £4 or £5 million worth of the contract. So there is a constant focus on trying to get the best price we can. And I think, you know, the CRC's proposal came about because we've kind of done all the easy stuff. You know, we've gone into places where we can make the savings without affecting service levels, and this is kind of where we've got to.
We had three goes. If we've got time afterwards, Mike can come back, but other colleagues also want to speak. So don't worry. Jonathan.
I was just going to pick up on a point that Becky made in our meetings about community garden waste recycling, and currently it's quite a big thing that gets brought to our CRCs, but she had a really good example, I think, in
Tatsfield, yes. They have a community recycling centre for their compost.
Yeah, and that might be something which we might look into about whether that sort of thing could be replicated across the county. That would reduce the amount of stuff that needs to come to the CRCs, and it may be the case that, as in the past, where you went to the Bring site for certain things, you went to your CRCs for others, you have other things on the doorsteps. Again, in the future, there may be more of a balance of different places for different things. The other thing to stress, we talked about, you know, if we went down the original proposals, would we really get the £1 million savings? Because we've moved the charging already, has moved the commercial operators, I think, away from our CRCs. So these closing of the small CRCs would mainly affect residents. So what would residents do to the stuff instead? Well, either they would spend a long time driving somewhere else, or if they chose not to recycle some of those things and throw them into their rubbish instead at no cost, then that would cost us even more money. So the proposed £1 million savings may not deliver what it proposes anyway.
Thank you. First of all, can I say I'm delighted to hear that you're looking at actually not closing anything at all. I think that's it shows that your task group has obviously produced results already. I just wondered, with reference to one or two of the things that you've said. You've talked about reuse, the reuse shops. I wondered also whether you thought of suggesting the council links up with charities such as British Heart Foundation and Furniture Link to see again if we can take even more out of the stream. With reference to bikes, an alternative, as well as the prison project, is that in Guildford we have a social enterprise partnership called the Bike Project. So you might like to look at that as an alternative. And charities, I know some charities have been quite good at putting up some clothes collection points actually in communities, not just at British Heart Foundation, for example, when the students are leaving Guildford, in the areas where students live in HMOs, they're putting collection points for clothes and stuff like that students would want to throw out. So again, it keeps it out of the waste stream and means that it can be used for something else. So those might be some suggestions that you might want to take into account. Thank you.
Very positive points. Thanks. Fiona. Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a small point about food recycling. We do food recycling in our house, but one of the problems in the summer, this recycled food is a tremendous breeding ground for small fruit flies, sort of thing. So if you have the small bin in the kitchen that you're provided with, you get, whenever you open the lid, you get this host of little flies flying out, and this is pretty off-putting. I don't know if it's possible to actually have bins that are airtight in some way that would stop that happening. Because what happens is you then have to leave it outside, and it becomes less of an incentive for everybody in the house to go outside and do it. And it has to be left a little bit away from the house. So that's just one thing that I think probably puts people off food recycling. It's quite a few months in the year. I don't know if there's a simple solution to that. A more general point about CRCs, I can only really talk about the Farnham CRC, and it's both at the same time a tremendously valued facility and also, on the other hand, a pretty unpopular one. And our particular CRC has firstly got these metal stairs that people have to climb up, which is a bit dangerous for some of the older people and so on. And also, unfortunately, the staff are seen by many people in Farnham as being unhelpful and unfriendly. I've actually spoken to the staff, and the fact of the matter is that they are quite decent people, actually. They're just overworked in a sense. There's not enough of them to do the job properly. And they're incentivised by Suez, who manages them. The main thing they have to do is to control the public, to actually make sure that the public puts things into the right bins rather than actually be helpful to them. And 2 out of the 4 staff were in their mid-70s anyway, so they were rather older than many of the people who were supposed to be helping, up the stairs with things and so on and so forth. That's just the way the public views the recycling centre in Farnham. They were outraged at the idea that it would be closed down, but they're also pretty critical of it. So I just thought I'd tell you that. Because of that, I did learn that quite a lot of people use nearby Hampshire, because we are actually at Farnham, right in the edge of Surrey, and we're very close to the Aldershot Recycling Centre, the Farnborough one, even the Alton one, and they're widely used by people in Farnham. And I went along to see how they operated, and they did seem to be, frankly, better run. They didn't have the problems I've described. They seemed to have more staff. They seemed to have staff with a more obviously helpful attitude because there's more of them, and so on and so forth. And by and large, they didn't have these metal stairs that we have in Farnham. So that's just some general comments. I don't know if you find them helpful or not about the Farnham CRC.
Oh, thank you. It was just to sort of slightly build on something that Jonathan said. I mean, really, I think we all know that whatever we do or implement here, it needs to be followed up with a huge communication campaign. So Jonathan's talking about residents who can't take their bricks to the local CRC, and so rather than run them, on an hour-long round trip to take them somewhere else, they'll put them in their black bin bags at home or their wheelie bins, not understanding and comprehending that it still hits everybody in the pocket. But we still are responsible for disposal of all the waste in Surrey. And I don't think people understand the Surrey waste model. And thinking about things like the food caddies, they've been around for, I don't know how many years, I'm going to say 5, but maybe it's more, 7, I don't know. But so it's no wonder that the use of them isn't as high as we'd like if we don't have a sort of continual push or a big push to people. I mean, my mother-in-law lives in Mole Valley and she hasn't got one. I don't know why she hasn't got one, but, you know, there are clearly going to be people, I know, naughty, but, you know, there's clearly people who need a reminder, and just there's never been more interest, I don't think, in what we do with our waste as there is now. It's such a hot topic that I feel like if we push at it and give people the information they need, that they will listen and respond to what we're suggesting.
So Saj.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, again, like Fiona, I'd like to echo thank you for not closing any CRCs. That's a positive way forward. You talked about the compost. In the past in Woking, and Cullen will correct me if I'm wrong, we have actually in Woking issued compost bins free of charge to first 50 or 60 residents to encourage that compost. So maybe that could be copied throughout there. The other thing is the curbside collection that we do very well. It's not well publicised. You know, you don't see very much actually being picked up. Maybe there should be another campaign, I don't know, on the radio or something to try and encourage people to do curbside. That could stop trips to the CRCs, you know, and again reduce the cost on there. Thank you.
The difficulty, as Becky has outlined very clearly, is the fact that we have two different partners working, not together all of the time, and certainly not joined up in certain ways. Mole Valley doesn't collect food waste. That's so much out of step with everywhere else. The type of waste is not joined up either. The Surrey Waste Partnership some 8 years ago started talking about having a joint waste contract. And the example given for having a joint waste contract was that 4 B&Ds on the coast joined together and put in place one contract for the 4 boroughs and districts. Their cost prior to that joint contract was 13 million a year. Having made a new contract, joining the whole thing together, the cost of managing that, or running that, paying for it, came down to 7 million a year in year 1. Is that still in effect? Are we still hoping to get that in place? The Surrey Waste Partnership, to a degree, does not really give an outcome for a lot of the things they talk about. And there needs to be more focus at that level, because that's where the thing can change dramatically. If we're all doing the same thing, all at the same time, under one contract of maybe four quadrants for Surrey, then there is money to be saved, if that's what you want to do. It also means that by using a similar operation in all of the boroughs and districts, you maximise the return. And you haven't talked about that, Andrew, and I'm amazed.
I'm going to let the officer answer that one, John, in the sense of the contractual situation. But, you know, I think there's no question the task group recognise the importance of the Surrey Waste Partnership. We've actually been along and spoken to them, and that's where a lot of those savings can be made in all sorts of ways. But can I very quickly pick up one or two of the other points? And Fiona's point about working with social enterprises, charities, etc. Yes, I think that's one of the themes that we've got. Not a lot of detail on it at the moment, but absolutely with you there. I don't know the answer on fruit flies, but what I can tell you with blowflies, you won't get a problem because their eggs take more than a week to hatch. So that's why if you have your food waste collecting every week, you won't get lots of blowflies coming out. I'm not sure about the fruit flies. So, on Farnham, I think some of the Farnham members have made suggestions about how Farnham could be improved. But as we're in public session, I don't think I want to say anything more on that. But I will say in terms of the visits that we made as a task group to other CRCs, we found the staff extremely helpful and I have to say really first rate, I thought, in terms of everything that I saw. And in terms of education and publicity, yes. And I think those of us, as politicians, you know that if you go around canvassing 3 years after the last time you went, you understand how many people have actually changed, and the turnover of people. So I think that tells you, that sort of education publicity campaign has to be ongoing. It really does, yeah. And do you want to say about the contract?
I'll pick up the issue about the joint waste contract. So currently across Surrey there are 4 districts that work within the joint waste contract. The procurement predates me, so hopefully I haven't got this wrong, but I'm fairly certain that at the time that was being discussed, all partners would have had the opportunity to consider the opportunities, the benefits, but also some of the disadvantages of coming together as a single contract across the whole of Surrey. And the chances are there'll be many different reasons why some of the partners chose not to take part. It could have been because of issues around their current contracts and the timing. So we have seen a phased approach with the 4. That might have been just too complex for some of those that didn't take part. Some districts may have been satisfied with the collection services they were getting from their contractors, so may not have wanted to risk changing contractor. But what I think we'll see with the government's consultation and the drive towards greater consistency around collections of recycling, it may reopen that question. Because if in effect we're legislated to all do it the same, then perhaps the issue of kind of how we then procure that may be worth another visit. But I don't have the details immediately to hand, but obviously we are tied into an existing arrangement through the Joint Waste Solutions with Amy. I'd have to come back to you, Chair, about when that contract ends and when we could review that, but I can provide that detail separately.
Thank you very much. Just before we go into us as a committee trying to make some additional recommendations, just have a very quick question to Andrew. You say, is your task group considering whether about charging, continuing charging? If it isn't, it should. And therefore, the question between now and then, as part of your overall report, is: do you have any initial views, because this is controversial as well, on the other vexed issue of charging, and for what?
I think the group has not taken a view yet, but I think if you start from the point which I kind of reiterated several times, that we want to encourage recycling, we want to send out a message about it, I think that does tend to point you in a particular direction.
The answer. Committee, normally at this, in the previous time, we'd all huddle for a bit and then come back with some Deus Ex Machina for you to all agree. Try, we haven't got much time. One of the jobs of the chairman, I hope, is to try and sort of sense where the committee is coming from and then open it up so we can get some specific recommendations apart from noting, which we don't do anymore. The first that I sense around the table is we welcome and would applaud the task group's indications that it would want to keep all the recycling centres, and we should perhaps endorse that and suggest that part of our recommendations as you go forward. The second, which I also heard, is that as you go forward to recommendations, the more flesh you can put on the how to increase reusable, increase recycling, the better it will be and the more credible and convincing your report will be, the more specific. And that takes all the suggestions that have been made around the table. I think a third element is that this committee would encourage you and others, and particularly the general public, to, if this thing is to work, to have an extensive publicity communication to our residents such that they will feel under a new regime that they will recycle and reuse more. And within that, the ability of the voluntary sector, communities and charities to be part of that process, even better. Those are the 4 things that I sensed from the meeting, but it's now open for other colleagues to say if they've got any other specific recommendations that they would like this committee to say to the task group, but then more important, as the task group, to the Cabinet itself when it makes a decision.
that we would also recommend the task group to reconsider the question of charging?
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming. And the paper that was circulated, short, sharp, and I thought rather well-written paper, for which many thanks. We can either go into questions, or either Colin or Simon or Jason, if you want just a very short introduction or summary or key points, and then we'll open it up to colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments on the paper. Thank you for the committee inviting us along. I think this piece of work sort of came out of a vision. We do a lot of transport stuff piecemeal across the county and trying to decide what's needed and where. The idea of this, which was not led by the Transport Department, and actually the company that's doing the work for us is not a specific transport company, was around understanding people, about understanding how people move around the county, why they move around the county and where they're going. Now that's obviously a massive piece of work which would take years and years to actually pull together. But to get some key themes about where people are moving and why they're moving about. Now a lot of us will know that. Members can feed into this. Empower have engaged with disabled groups, elderly groups, young people and everybody in between to try and understand some of the movements and the stuff that's going on. Because at that point, and we're only halfway through the programme at the moment, the work they're doing, and we've got some initial themes which are in your paper, but then we can start to overlay that with our transport things and try and come up with initiatives and try and just think outside the box about how, there's part of the work that's coming out is like 20% of all movements are health related, people going to doctors and dentists and all the rest of it. So actually, is there part of technology we can use with our health partners and everything else about taking away the need for some of that transportation? So I think this was a scoping piece of work to try and just think differently about Surrey, and actually how do we set it up for, not necessarily setting it up for today, but how do we set it up for tomorrow as well? I don't know if Simon, if you want to add anything to that.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Simon Griffin from the Strategic Commissioning Team. So not a huge amount to add to that introduction, just to emphasise, I guess, the fact that this is the start of what I think we've always thought would be a 2-year piece of work. So this initial phase is a discovery piece of phase, so largely looking at engagement, but as Colin said, we are also looking at data analysis around supply and demand, but also looking at what's happening elsewhere. What we're keen to do is get as many views as possible, so from partners and residents, community groups, and then when those themes emerge through the engagement that we're seeing now, so I guess concerns around health, wellbeing and environment, difficulty recruiting and retaining the right skills and experience, difficulty accessing communities and services, we're looking to translate those into some practical pilot projects as the next phase of the project. So we're really looking to do some stuff in the short term that would have some practical impact, but I think they will tease out as well some of the issues that we're going to need to have a look at around policy development, implementation, decision-making processes, and obviously getting the governance right to match that. So it's going to be a blend of that kind of short-term work, but also, as Colin says, having a look at that longer-term work as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Before I open it up, just first comment, really to Colin, and it's a kind of basic question. Because if you say, look at paragraph 1, the very first paragraph, the Rethinking Transport project has been set up to fundamentally reimagine transport in Surrey, developing new sustainable transport, etc. you have, even by that first sentence, raised expectations amongst our residents and amongst us as councillors to a very high level. You've also said that you expect to see some results, some positive results within 2 years, which is actually not very far away. So my question really to Colin as the politician is, how committed are you as the Deputy Leader and the administration to really, in 2 years, to be well down the path of fundamental reimagining transport in Surrey, either as ourselves in part or with other partners and other institutions? I mean, because if you're not, it's far better not even to start that, because expectations have already been raised and will continue to be raised, and therefore at the end of it, something substantive has to be delivered.
Thank you. Really good question, and actually one I asked myself some time ago when we started to talk about this, because actually you're right, and I think there's somehow in our mind I really get frustrated with all things, whether it's children's, adult social care, roads, whatever, about we do things because this is the way we've always done them. So absolutely really committed to rethinking transport. But what we need to do as this process starts to unwield over the next few months and whatever, is to think about, we start to separate the strategies. So there will be some quick wins to do today. There will be some medium-term pieces of work that will be done in 2 or 3 years' time, and there will be some long-term strategies that hopefully will come out of this, that will do that some quick wins, but actually have a clear vision about what we're trying to achieve. Now, I don't underestimate how massive that question is. And I dare say at some point there will be some, dare I say, potholes in the road to actually navigate around and through. But actually I think it is worth setting that high-level challenge to ourselves, and this is to all of us actually, this high-level challenge to all members and officers to actually try and make this work, because I think it is, we all talk about the 2030 vision and what does it mean, and we talk about environmental issues, health and well-being, because this feeds into all of these bits of work. So actually, it is right to challenge ourselves, it is right to be optimistic and look at what we can achieve in the short, the medium and the long term.
My short supplementary question to that is, can you enumerate, in essence, you say we can have a few quick wins. What might those be?
Don't know. Because, actually, I don't want to preempt what these people have got. I've got some ideas, but actually I'm not going to say them now because I don't want to preempt what the pieces of work are. The idea of getting this outside company to look inwards is we take away from some of the preconceptions we may have. What I think will be a quick win actually may achieve nothing at all. So, and that's why getting InPower to look at this, they were brought in around all the people that tended to do this piece of work. They were the ones selected purely because of the way they approach a lot of this, and actually, come out with, there was a lot of young people, the different groups that actually do the analysis, and not as well as asking the questions, and actually just think about throwing some real wild ideas out there. That may be something we can grab hold of, and maybe their idea is not deliverable in the short term, but actually we could go part of that direction.
Enough. Jonathan.
Do you mind if I respond on that as well? So I think, again, worth kind of recognising where we are in the process and the fact that the approach that we've taken recognises that transport is clearly a deeply strategic issue. And by that I mean it's complicated and it involves a range of partners working together to provide the system effectively. So through the engagement that we've carried out, through the research that we've carried out, we do have what is effectively a long list of pilot projects. But I think because we haven't concluded that initial phase, and because of the fact that it requires partners to work with us as a system to deliver those effectively, we're not quite at a stage that we're able to say these are the things that we should be doing in the short term. So I think that involvement of our partners and taking that collective decision as to which ones we would try to focus on in the short term is crucial. So I wouldn't want to short-circuit that process, because I think that system approach is critical.
Thank you. I must admit, I read this report and I read it again because after reading it the first time I wasn't sure exactly what it was setting out to do. So I've got a couple of questions, hopefully, just to clarify that, if you would. Firstly, in terms of the type of consultation you're doing, will you be looking at Google Maps and Google Map data to see the journeys that people are actually taking, or will you just be talking to people? Because it would be really good to back your qualitative talking to people with some real desire lines. So, for example, we've had talks before about the lack of buses between Camberley and Heathrow Airport in this room, and why they aren't there. There probably are places where we can introduce new buses because the demand is there, but we've never thought about providing it. Secondly, which is a linked question, I'm really worried when people pop up with these new ideas without having a history to it. Is this a precursor to more cuts to our buses across Surrey? Or is this what's going to deliver us a transformation to a massively increased and better used bus service together with more active transport, that's walking and cycling across Surrey, removing the dependence on the car? Because the idea of rethinking transport, and me sitting here on Environment Committee, yes, I think that's all about transforming our relationship with the car and the emissions of transport. But then I was worried because I looked about the three key areas this focused on. One was air pollution. There were two others. But the council decided to stop talking about air pollution a couple of years ago and instead linked air pollution and climate change and merged two strategies together and called it our new low emissions strategy. But this seems to be talking about our old approach, which was to talk about air pollution on its own. So I just want your commitment that actually this is going to deal equally with climate change and air pollution, and clearly that shift to a massive increase in public transport is what would bring that about.
I'm going to let Simon deal with the first part of that and probably the last bit, but you made a statement in the middle there which I sort of wanted to pick up on, which is this about cuts? And I want to give you absolute assurance it is not. Now, having said that, let me quantify, let me have the conversation. So I think this is about, we spend £11 million a year on buses. Is that invested in the right place? Could we, rather than a 52-seater bus running around with 5 people, there's something smaller we could be doing and actually investing in community transport through some of the boroughs to deliver some of those more localised services. This is about rethinking everything we do, but this is absolutely not driven about, OK, let's look at all the transport system and where can we make cuts. This is about rethinking where we need to go and what we need to do. The data collection is a massive piece of work, and I'll let Simon sort of touch on that.
With your permission, Chair, just to come back on that point there, if it's not about cuts, then I presume that when you look at the strategies coming forward, that the opportunities will be included to invest to save. Because I presume some of the ways we'll rethink transport will save money, some of them will cost more, and some will be revenue neutral. Some of them will be about revenue decisions, but some of them will need capital upfront spend to get changes downstream. So I just want your assurance, if I may, that there will be significant potential for long-term capital spend in this area as a result of this project.
All of the above. I'm not going to give a commitment to any one of those, but actually all of the above. It depends really what comes out of it, because actually once you come up with a strategy, you then put a business case together to drive that forward. And it may be, as quite rightly you say, there's a capital investment up front to get a long-term revenue saving, and that's about, but we need to understand where we're putting that money, because part of the business case will be that this data has shown this is the direction we need to go.
Yes, so exactly that. So we are intentionally not moving to solutions now. So that there's a very specific approach that we're taking, which is to take the time to listen to what partners, providers, the business community, and particularly residents are telling us about what their needs are. And I think until we've actually completed that process, it would be wrong to move into thinking about, well, what does that mean, A, for us as a council, but then B, for the system more broadly. So I think that partly kind of responds to the question about cuts and what we do with our buses, because I don't think we can make any effective decisions until we've had that insight. So there is a team, as Colin's mentioned, we commissioned Empower to work with us, so there's been an Empower team working with kind of blended Surrey team, if you like, so that's council officers, but then people representing health, boroughs and districts, working as part of that team as well, and they are still going through the process of pulling all available data together. But I'm not going to lie, I think what that process has revealed is that we do have gaps in our data in places, but I think for that reason it's probably quite a positive process, because in understanding where those gaps are, we know where we can actually start to focus our attention our efforts going forward, which may actually form part of the pilot project programme. And on air quality, I mean, all I would say, I think, is that the language that is in the report reflects the language that has been used by the people taking part in the engagement. So I certainly would suggest it's a change in council policy, but it merely kind of summarises the language, I guess, we've heard through those engagement events. And just a final thought, Chairman, just to say that this process will culminate with a report being produced that will pull together the engagement and the data and research piece. So further detail will be shared in due course in the next few weeks, I think, in that final discovery report. So.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I start off by saying, like the Chairman, I find some of these things that come up quite exciting to start off with, but I've learned to be a little jaundiced about getting excited over council projects because I've seen too many of them start and lapse into silence, and we never seem to get anywhere. So I'd like to think there is a real commitment to this because we don't want to raise expectations and then let people down. The point that Jonathan made as well, I think, is very important. If you find that there will be a need for upfront investment to make the changes that the Rethinking Transport project envisages, are you going to be prepared as a council, or are we going to be prepared as a council to make that investment? Because I have an idea that these sort of fundamental changes are not going to come cost-free. So I think we need to be careful about that. Have you got evidence of any other councils who've been through this sort of process, had a fundamental look at transport throughout their area and what the results were? So it would be really useful to know whether we're actually at the very cutting edge, which can be quite a frightening place to be, or whether there are some precedents there that we can follow. I'd like to know also who the partners are that we'll be working with on this. I'm assuming the districts and boroughs, but what other partners have you identified who we need to bring along with us to make sure that we can deliver what we're setting out in this paper? Oh, and Simon, I'd like to talk to you a bit later about what the evidence is for the 20% of journeys being health related, because that came up in another forum, and I'd be very interested to know the answer.
Let's start with that. I think the investment point I'll take first. So I think, as with all of these things, we have a financial issue and an element that we need to address and we need to be mindful and work within. But actually, better use of capital will have a long-term impact and benefit to our revenue situation. That's an obvious point, and we need to get better as a council about how we use our capital and using it more and actually using more of it. So I'm totally up for that argument. I'm not going to say I'm going to win every one of them, but I'm actually up for this charge, and there is a general conversation between CLT and Cabinet that actually we need to get better committed to this, and we need to understand where our capital needs to be invested to get the best for the future. So absolutely committed to it, but we'll see where it goes. Are other councils doing it? As far as we could undertake, or what we've seen, and I just reconfirm, Simon, in case anything else has come up in the meantime, no one else has approached it from this standpoint. A lot of people have done analysis of their own transport systems, but no one's taken it from the people point of view and how people move about, and just looking at the whole and looking what's next. So I think, and I don't want it poisoned by some transport studies. I was very clear in the beginning on this to take transport out of it. This is about people and how people move about. Now, transport's going to come into it, we know that, but I think, in them early stages, to really get to understand people. I don't want to know what you use the 91 bus for and how often you use it. I want to know why you made that journey and where you were going, because actually that will come into an impact around mapping out this. So I think that there's a slightly different conversation to this, which we hadn't found anyone else has had.
Yes, so in terms of case studies, we've found a few that I think look at specific aspects of transport systems, but perhaps there isn't anything that is taking this broad and inclusive an approach. So, for example, Leeds City Council, Hackney have done something on cycle schemes, so we're uncovering things that are happening elsewhere. Tees Valley, I think, is the place that has come closest to a project like this. I mean, I have to acknowledge that my knowledge is not, universal, so these are the things that I'm aware of. And the interesting thing about Tees Valley is that's a concept that came about through somebody I spoke to at Cubic, which is a company that operates in Surrey, that set up the Oyster card system in London. So I mentioned that as an indication of the fact that the engagement has been broad, and in fact is leading on to connections elsewhere outside Surrey. And then linking to that point, so the partners that we're working with, we've spoken to businesses, representatives of business communities, in the sense that I spoke to Bob Pickles, for example, on the Education and Skills Board. We've spoken to the two LEPs. In fact, I'm going to a LEP meeting later on this week as close to Capital. Education settings, yes, boroughs and districts. In fact, we had 3 workshops for borough and district officers to look at key aspects of their work. So you get the sense that there has been a really comprehensive, broad... Oh, and I forgot to mention health colleagues. Shouldn't do that, thank you. So we've been to System Board. We've been to speak to representatives of CCG, providers also. There are a couple of events coming up in July that I'll be attending with health colleagues. So there really has been that sense that it's been a kind of system approach. And we're kind of looking to kind of... I guess it's the terrible phrase ownership, but we're looking to secure that kind of broad ownership right from the off, so that people can understand the benefits of this piece of work for them as individual organisations as well as the whole system.
Also, youth cabinet and some youth organisations have been involved in them conversations as well.
Thank you. Becky.
Thank you. Just to ask, request or suggest, perhaps, when you do your data analysis, that you consider rural versus urban separately. Obviously, rural environments, everybody has a completely different reliance on their car. I can partly understand why you say that the health, the number of journeys for health is the highest, because if I just imagine my own village and the number of people going to and from the doctors, to and from the pharmacy, myself, I do it a lot, and I have a healthy family. So, obviously decisions have been made by doctors, for example, in the past, doctors' surgeries, to move their practices out of rural communities for cost reasons, I would have thought. And are we perhaps now suggesting that they do run a clinic in a village one day a week, which would be greatly welcomed by lots of people and would save car journeys? And just on another point, I am quite amazed that it's health related, because I would have thought it's school journey related. The number of car and transport movements in a day must be staggering. Children who are travelling to schools which are not necessarily their local school. And I don't have the answer to what can be done about that, but clearly that and the pollution around school is a major health worry and concern for everybody.
And schools transport is sort of focused in one particular period, where it was probably spread over a whole day period and that as well. I think I totally agree with the rural community. Done quite a bit of work and engagement around understanding the rural community, and also the whole how much rural impacts on the local investment and everything else, and how important that is. And how important it is to Surrey as a whole. So it isn't just about our towns, it is the rural economy that is very important to Surrey as well. So actually joining all that in absolutely is on the agenda, and understanding part of that. And you just say you almost just came there to a conclusion and a solution. Actually, if a doctor did an outreach once a week in a community, might save a whole lot of journeys. So perhaps we go backwards on thinking about how we do that, and that's why it's important for the health partners to be involved in this piece of work.
Right. Any other colleague?
Sorry, Chair, just one thing on that question. So, predating this piece of work, I know health colleagues have been looking at their outpatients model, and that's just one example where, I certainly wouldn't claim that it sits under this project as it's a new work stream that's come about recently, but it's something that we would certainly look to draw upon as part of this work. So I think recognising statistic that Colin mentioned at the beginning, I think health colleagues know that there are ways of giving people access to health services and health provision that don't require them making the journey across the county to a hospital, for example, certainly in the case of outpatients. So where it is possible to move those appointments, those services closer to the patients, into communities, they are already looking at doing that. So I think this project will involve new things, but it will also involve us pulling work already taking place under partners closer together.
Thank you very much. Any other colleague want to make any? Saj, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Heard a lot about this. This is a real good rethinking of transport. Colin, I want to put you on the spot here. Simon's just said that, a tremendous amount of work's already been done. You've spoken to quite a few people and workshops and everything else. And obviously everything costs money. Given the current constraints of our financial position, county, how committed are we to actually pursue this? I mean, at the end of it, how committed are we? Can we, it's not going to be do the consultation and then stop it.
I think a commitment, and the question has already come across from two others on the commitment to the project, but also the financial benefits, but also the financial costs about driving this forward. And I think that there is a balance coming forward about how do we better invest in Surrey to get long-term solutions. And it may be that capital investment to get revenue investment is always going to be quite difficult to do, but capital investment to have revenue benefits later on. And it's not just us investing. We just talked about the stuff that the health service are doing. Actually, will probably have a revenue saving on us because of the work they're doing. And that's why it's important to everyone pulls together to see where we can pull that forward. And I've just, Chair, if I can come on one point, obviously we just mentioned another report which will be out sometime either just before the summer or over the summer, and probably worth at the next committee if it's ready to actually come back to you to have another look at it so you can keep on top of where this is going.
Thank you, Colin. And I think your final point is a good one, and I'm sure we will. For committee members now, we've got to see what we want to do as a committee. My initial remarks before opening it up is, again, a sense that all around the table there's unanimity that this is a project worth pursuing in detail, as long as the commitment is there to see it through to some meaningful outcome in 2 years' time. So that process, although it's quite complicated, very complicated, is actually constrained quite a small time period, if we are to 2 years maybe, for something material to happen. So the question, I suppose, to the committee as a whole that I would put is, particularly since in the report they were talking about pilot projects, stuff that may happen, that will happen, that can be tested out in communities, whether our committee, or maybe a task group comprising our committee, should be following this, being part of the pilot process study, at the same time as we as a complete committee keep a watchful, benevolent and challenging eye on the process going forward over the next 2 years. One option is not to do that and wait till September and see what happens. But my own instinct, for what it's worth, and it's just me, is that I think we might be losing a trick here, again in our policy formation role, that if we can get into some of the details of projects as elected members with a good sense check of actually what works rather than maybe theoretical, then we are helping that process to deliver a successful outcome. If, on the other hand, at this stage, colleagues are more relaxed and say, well, we're only at first base, we really shouldn't do much more than a holding operation, well, that's also another choice. I just put those broad parameters for the sense of the meeting and our recommendation that will follow from there. Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think a task group is very tempting, but I am a little worried that there may be more than 2 contenders for task groups for this committee. And I think perhaps we should not make that decision yet, but talk about it when we come to the future work programme, so that we identify potential task groups and then make a decision as to which ones we want to go ahead with at the moment, if other people would agree with that.
John.
We've already had a pre-discussion about work task groups, and I think we have an issue with that, and I think we need to understand fully what that issue is amounting to. Listening to the reports by Colin and Simon, the situation is that they've got a lot of things going on, but nothing really that we could focus on as a working group. I don't believe we're a sounding board for them, because you're doing enough already. I am aware that in Runnymede you are having discussions about their transport, and in fact moving very quickly towards a pilot scheme being run between them. And I think that will be more than enough in the future when we come back to it. I don't think it's for now to operate a working group on this.
I agree with John, Mr. Chairman. We don't want to proliferate working groups, and we can't under the present rulings. We're only going to be repeating the work that's been going on, that's already going on, and the time's not right.
Okay. Thank you. Jonathan?
I suggest if they've got a report coming out in a couple of weeks, we bring this back to the next task group, and once we can see what they've done, we might be in a better position to make a decision then.
That seems sensible. So we won't do anything now, but bearing in mind that there will be a report, an update, it can't just be the same again, something additional to what we know now, then we'll be in a better position to decide whether we progress or not.
We also discussed the issue of perhaps the cabinet member or the lead officer providing a briefing note by email in advance of our meetings to keep us up to date with what's going on. I think that's an excellent suggestion, and perhaps one that you could agree to.
I think it's a good idea by John. Simon will take that forward and make sure that happens. And I think your comment, Chair, on policy is a really interesting one, which I hadn't really considered. But actually, you're right, and actually your role around policy. So as this piece of work develops towards the latter part of this year or into the early part of next year, actually sitting down and looking at our policies that this affects and actually coming up with some ideas about changes to policy going forward, I think is an excellent piece of work.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I record, ironically, that over the last year there have been an awful lot of work done on good scrutiny and how to do it. And one of the things that emerged from that was that a good scrutiny process does not continually call the matter back and look at it again. It chooses it, dives into it, comes to conclusions and then goes away. And we're talking the exact opposite. We're going to bring it back and we're going to keep an eye on it.
That's a good pushback, Ken. So what are you suggesting we do then?
Just leave it for now. We've made our points, and we can choose to look at the subject again if we want to. But to keep on having it back on another agenda is bad policy.
In one way, I agree with you, but equally, we also discussed the fact that we don't want to bring stuff back and then review it, but to keep abreast of what's going on will indicate to us and determine for us when we actually bring it back for a very close look and come out with some outcomes and something of value. The briefing by an officer or by the cabinet member in between, by email, doesn't require us all to sit around the table, but it does and will raise questions in our minds that we can actually funnel through to the officer and the cabinet member concerned in order to make it more detailed next time and to raise questions and issues prior to coming in. Because we can affect your work more easily that way than actually sitting on a group and then starting the whole thing again for ourselves.
I know Simon would like to have a brief word, then we'll try and bring it.
Could I just come back on that one point? I'm not saying don't do this. I just ironically recorded the point. But actually, the theory of the process is that the chairman does all that and then brings it back if he thinks it's necessary.
I mean, my only point on this is that this is part of, and I agree with both, as a good chairman should, both Ken and John. but as far as I see it, this is part of policy formulation going forward. It's not scrutinising something that's been done and keep chewing at it. This is at what point, and it's certainly not today. Do we, as a committee, get actively involved in taking something forward rather than looking back and seeing what went wrong or what we should have done better? It's much more forward-looking. I think the only issue is when is the appropriate time to do it, and there's a consensus, I think, around the table that today is not that time. It's all right.
Just one thought on that, if I may. I know the committee is also looking at working on, I guess, other related themes, certainly around the environment. So, however we take the work forward with the committee on rethinking transport, there will be opportunities for work that comes up through this project to be scrutinised by the committee. And I think as officers, it's our job to make sure that those related pieces of work are closely aligned so that we're working efficiently.
Thank you. Whilst that makes sense, maybe we can conclude it by a sort of portmanteau recommendation. Committee endorse the Rethinking Transport project and will receive an update on the conclusion of the discovery phase to take forward. Yeah.
I'm not sure I know enough about it from what we've heard today to be able to endorse it. I know that it's happening. I think we've got vague ideas of what it's going to do, but we've not been told the details, and I think we've been told by Colin that you're holding back on telling us the details until later. So to say we can endorse it might be to be a step too far, I would say.
We've got to have, I'd probably unleash the forces of war. Short and sharp, Fiona, then
Well,
Becky.
I take Jonathan's point about endorsing it because that means that somehow we're saying this is absolutely right. I think we should support the work going forward. And on the briefings, Chairman, I note Ken's comment, but I think I'd rather like it if all committee members receive the written briefing, because that way we can decide when we want to put it back onto the work programme.
Okay, I agree with that. Becky.
Only to say that support or endorse, aren't we saying as a group that we welcome this bit of work and we want them to continue and to support it? So I think the wording is fine.
Fine. John? Okay, so... Yeah, I think that what John and Becky and Fiona has summarised is, I hope, broadly speaking, supportive, and we'll find the appropriate words to reflect that. I don't see any dissent, so I'm taking that as read. Thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed. Right, we now move on to item 6, Fire Transformation Working Group Progress Report. Very important issue that is high on our residents' priority. Way I think we'll, subject to consent of colleagues. Yeah, come. Yeah, please. Yeah, let's sit where we want. Join us on the. Yeah, please. Of course. I think the way we'll do it, otherwise we could get ourselves into a little bit of a muddle, is that for Saj and any other members of the working group, give us an update on where they are, some provisional recommendations or ideas or comments in as much as they are supportive of the strategy or in a way detract from the strategies. That's what we want to focus on. And then we'll ask the team of officers and Steve and the officer and Denise to reflect on that, and we'll take questions. Is that process okay with everybody? Good. Saj, do you want to start off by summarising where you are with the group so far?
Thank you, Chairman. Before I actually summarise this, I just want to thank the group that's been helping me with this. Although not everybody is present because the committee system changed, therefore the membership is now, although some of them are still carrying on, but they haven't attended this meeting today, but particularly Tina, who's come off to do this. This working group was set up back in December after an Environment Committee meeting to look at the fire, making safer safety plan, community safety plan, and we've been engaging with various stakeholders and officers. All together, the report covers it. We've met something like 17 different at 17 different meetings and captured their issues and concerns. When the working group was set up, we basically had line of inquiries we formulated, and they're on page 15. And each and every one was actually sent this line of inquiry before the meeting to get their responses. And we've gathered information. We're still in the process of gathering information. And you've probably seen the report in there. It is very important, vital that after the inspector's report that something had to be done about the fire services, which is a major part of our lives. It concerns every resident in the borough, in the counties as a whole, and it's on everybody's four figures. And the main object is to keep people safe. It's the safety measures that are being proposed, and this is what we're looking. And obviously, we haven't actually formed any conclusions yet because we haven't met everybody, but it's there, and we look for more witnesses, more input. I did at the full council invite any council member to come on board. Councillor Chris Button took the challenge and he actually came on. I thank him very much for his output. He was a great servant. We've met everybody, like I say, across the board, the unions, and we're still looking for more people to give us witnesses and their concerns. I'm not going to say very much more, but Tina, if you want to add something on to it.
It was quite fascinating when we went to Hampshire to compare the way they work in Hampshire to the way we work in Surrey, and that's because Hampshire is independent of their county. The one thing that impressed me greatly was the Chief Fire Officer. I mean, we didn't meet any firefighters, I hasten to add. We met the Chief Fire Officer, and he said that he had included the firefighters with the changes, so that as the changes came to fruition, they weren't complaining because they're the ones that actually had made the decisions. So I think that's quite important that that happens in Surrey as well. And how he was able to raise money because he was independent rather than being part of the county. So that's the most important thing I came away with. If you want to know what my concerns are from what I have experienced is we still work on a watch system apparently in Surrey, and they don't in Hampshire. And it was also the hours that the firefighters worked. I was a bit taken aback to know that firefighters still go to bed on a couple of evenings at midnight, unless of course there is a shout. And I worked that out, that they do an 8-day shift, 4 days on, 4 days off. So if they don't get a shout in the evening, they're doing a 28-hour, 8-day, which didn't seem a particularly brilliant form of resource. And I know that you're trying to make changes, and they are resisting, so I'm told anyway. The other important thing from Hampshire was that they used a lot of working mothers, because when you've got firefighters on call, obviously trained working mothers, they can say they work, say, from 10 till 2 because their children will be at school, and then perhaps after 6 because their husband's home. And it seemed to me that we met some firefighters who were in charge of schools, going to visit schools, and they were concerned that they didn't have enough time. Well, I would think it would be quite good actually working mothers. lends itself to them being trained to go and work in the schools, to speak to the children about fire safety, which permeates back so the parents hear about it, and it's trying to prevent fires rather than having to deal with them after they've occurred. I'll stop there because I'm sure other people have got things to say, but I have got.
Thank you very much, Sajid and Tina. Again, to both of them, my first question is, and I really appreciate you've got some work to do. You've met an awful lot of people, right across the community, including firefighters themselves. And my question, which you may not be able to answer, but at some point it's going to have to be answered, is not least because of the public consultation. No doubt hear more from Denise. Focus was, rightly or wrongly, for many communities, including the Fire Brigade Union, that the nighttime closure of a number of stations would lead to compromises in safety. And that's been the headline in the media, and at some point all of us are going to have to come to a view on that. Based on that was the basis of the consultation in making Surrey safer. Based on the discussions you've had and your own discussions internally, do you share that concern, or have you not got round to thinking in such specific terms about particular items, and particularly the controversial items that are in the plan that has just emerged from consultation?
Do you want to go? Yeah. I think, Chairman, one of the main issues here is the shortage of staff, lack of staff. I think for any program to work in any form whatsoever, you need to have a full shift on. And the sort of issues that we haven't actually formed a conclusion. We haven't come to a conclusion yet, because obviously we've still got more people to speak with. But it's a shortage of staff at the moment. So once that's addressed, I've seen the dynamic system that we operate in Surrey, and this was actually applauded by the Hampshire County Council, that the way we deploy our fire engines, we can manoeuvre them around to actually meet the needs of the county. I think it's the first in the country. I don't know, I might be wrong, but I think it's really high tech. So I think once we get the full staff on board, then the rest can take its course.
Yes, right. I would agree with that, because one of the problems we had in Epsom when we had our fire in Stoneleigh, which was nasty, 4 homes were lost, but no lives, thank goodness. The new system seemed to work very well, because in fact in Hampshire their estimated time is 8 minutes to get to a fire, and this was 7. So therefore Surrey did actually better than Hampshire. But I had quite abusive emails, I hasten to say mainly from my opposition, who were saying, well, where was our fire crew? Why wasn't our fire crew there? Well, it's because they don't actually understand how things are being strategically placed to make sure that all areas are covered. There definitely is a shortage of staff, but again, in Hampshire, as I say, working mothers were being trained so that when the children were looked after, they could actually be on call. But one of the big concerns that did come out, sorry, I'm going on, but some of the people who were on call were planning it, shall we say, that you have to have 4 people to go together to a fire engine, and that there were only 2 on call. So 2 were being paid, but they couldn't be called on call because there weren't 4 of them. So perhaps that's something that could be investigated a little bit more, because clearly we don't want to be paying people if they can't do the job that we're asking them to do.
First of all, can I apologise to Tina? That wasn't intended as a criticism. When I looked at my watch, it was just involuntary. Apologies. Mr. Chairman, I attended the member briefing which we had a few weeks ago, and I have to say I was quite impressed. And I took on board that the object of the exercise is to change the emphasis a little from firefighting to fire prevention. What I didn't entirely understand from that was whether that process will lead to a reduction in the establishment numbers, and whether that's the reason for the alleged shortage of firefighters. Because what I have heard since, in looking at the representatives of the membership of the fire service, is that they are criticising the loss of firefighters. So I'd be grateful for some information as to whether the establishment is being reduced or whether we simply have a temporary shortage of firefighters from other problems.
Thank you. So thank you, Ken. It's a good observation. There's a combination of historic shortages which go back a number of years and historic downsizing in the size of the fire service over the last 10 years as well, which is well known. We have, however, not just as a result of the HMI's report, which you will remember criticised the staff shortages, and more particularly actually criticised the way in which we were managing our staff to be available when they're needed. Some of that was acutely because of staff shortages. So when I took over as the interim chief fire officer, since last September, we've launched a campaign of recruiting. You'll be aware that this takes quite a while to do. It's not an easy process to get people off the street and get them onto the back of a fire engine at all. So we've had a number of different ways of doing that, and we've recruited over 70 people at the moment, new into the service, and that is already beginning to have an effect. We've got another 20-odd downstream on the next recruits course, which is in September, and we're also recruiting and attracting on-call or retained firefighters. And that includes, we launched last week our Twitter campaign, you will have seen, which is aimed at particularly, for example, mothers, working mothers as well, and other people as well, being more diverse in the on-call area as well. So identifying that, mounting the campaign, and then starting to get people through the door is just takes a while to get up to speed. But we are doing that now, and we are recruiting up to the levels that we need in order to maintain our full capacity. We have in the IRMP, however, also modelled what the correct levels of fire services are required, which includes that difference between the requirements at daytime and nighttime, which you've articulated in the IRMP, because we are less busy and because it's easier to get round at nighttime. And there are a number of scientific factors which have been externally validated, which validate our crewing proposals. I understand, of course, they're not all particularly well received, and that enables us to shift our capacity from the response into protection and prevention work, which we know will save lives downstream. Sorry, it's a bit long answer here, but the organisational chart for the protection and prevention work is being worked out now. We have an optimum size in order to deliver what is required both in the protection and prevention area, insofar as personnel, and also the personnel required to deliver the response element as well. So that is now being finalised as we talk. There's an overall number attached to that, which we haven't quite got to the finish of, because those specialities are different. The requirement to respond and put out fires and undertake rescues is sometimes quite different to that which is required in order to take protection and prevention work, and different types of people are more suited to that. What we're hoping to see, and we have in place, and we're going to talk to the workforce about, is what we've articulated in the IRMP is what we need to do and why we need to do it. How we will do it will be a conversation with the workforce once it has been agreed that that is what the County Council wants us to do, the Fire Authority of the County Council wants us to do, and that will be in September.
Chairman, may I just ask, so, am I right in assuming from that answer that you don't yet know whether the overall numbers will be less or more?
No, we don't know for sure.
Happy to take all comments. Just to remind, though, this item is more for is specifically about the report of the so far the interim findings of the task group. This issue is a big item on September even bearing in mind Ken's strictures of the previous meeting, because the Cabinet is going to decide that to resolve the issue the week after. So don't forget, we will have another bite of this cherry at our September meeting. So just bear that in mind if you still want to speak. Clearly you do. So Jonathan first.
Okay, fine. Yes, to two Johns, but you're longer than I am. Going back to a point that Tina made about the understanding within the residents' minds as to what it is we're actually doing. The spread of information about change or consultation is always something we do badly. Whether we like it or not, that's the outcome. One of the areas that I had to deal with was within Runnymede Borough Council, as I am a Runnymede councillor as well, was to get and use Denise's 2 emails detailing the situation and where they were. Because I was getting stuff like, well, the Egham fire station is not going to be staffed after 12 o'clock and stuff like that. I said, well, that's not the point. So I used the emails with members of the borough and district, sent it to everybody, so there was clarity for the first time in their minds as to what it was about and why it was happening. And I think we should always make use of our borough partners, because they will be the first to hear it. And that's where I got it from, people coming to me and saying, well, what's happening about this, that and the other? There were a lot of questions about Egham and also about Chertsey for a variety of reasons. But we do need to to spread information out more effectively and ensure that it's followed up when we get a response from it.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on a point made by Steve. I think he said that it's easier to get around at night. My understanding, looking at the evidence from the consultation, is that up until these changes, the average response time for day and night was roughly the same, but afterwards it's going to take longer in every borough and district to respond to a nighttime call than it does today, except for Tandridge, and it will take at least 2 minutes longer on average in Runnymede. So to say that, it's just because it's easier to get around at night doesn't sound like the whole truth. It looks like, on average, your stats in your consultation is that it'll take, on average, an extra 40 seconds after you've made all those changes. So there will be a delay in responding to nighttime calls, generally across the county, more in some places than others, and that's justified because it's better to target the resource at the rescue during the day. So I just think that it might be better to present the facts that you've presented the public in that way.
Yeah, so what we said to the public was that there will be no change to our response times. So that remains the same. We are getting to fires as quickly as we say we will be. In fact, most of the times we get there faster. The problem is that that doesn't always save lives. Getting somewhere faster doesn't always make a difference to the outcome, and we've seen that with some tragedies this year. And that's why it's more determined to make sure that we prevent these from happening. And in order to do that, we will use the resources that we can to prevent these tragedies happening downstream. And that is clearly the right thing to do, is to prevent anything happening rather than constantly trying to get there faster and faster over a number of seconds, which may not make the difference that is required to the outcomes of people's lives.
Yeah, with respect, I'm reading Appendix C1 of your consultation. It says, yes, there will be no changes in response times for weekdays, but there will be a 7:18 to 7:56, which is about a 40 seconds slower response time at night time, and overall the reduction will be 12 seconds slower. So it doesn't seem like it's getting faster and faster. What this consultation shows is that this consultation is to slow things down at night time. I mean, all I'm saying is I think it's reasonable to present in public something that reflects the data which we're consulted on. Here it says that this change will make it slower in our response times.
Can I just say, that's a fair point, Jonathan. To reiterate, this is coming back to us in September after the task group has reported. That's the real time, I think, to put. Otherwise we will just be going over the same ground again.
just want to make the point that if a comment's been made which looks to be factually slightly incorrect, not completely incorrect, but slightly incorrect, I think at least we should be clear with the public.
Becky, and then we will try and draw it to a conclusion.
I was only going to say, really, that as a council, we're not very good at explaining to residents whether we're making savings because we want to cut some costs, or whether they're savings because we're delivering a better service. And I noticed that in the report you've given, it talks about some comments to do with savings and where are these 3 million of savings. But my understanding is that the starting point for this was that the service was not up to scratch, that you're drawing on all these other services in other counties, what's best practice, and that's what you're trying to put in place. And that I think the message really should be that the money is irrelevant. If it actually costs more, then as a county that's what we should be paying for, because we need a safe service. If it happens to deliver some savings, great. But it seems that there's a bit of a mixed message going on here about whether it's a cost-saving exercise, which might be why people are rather upset about it, or whether it's an improvement of the service, which I think it is the latter.
So I think the cost saving is somebody else's message, not ours, and that's what we've been hearing a lot of. We've been really clear, this is not about cuts. This is not about taking money out of the service. This is about changing the way in which we provide the service within the same budget. What we're also saying is that if that delivers greater economies, well, that would be great, and I'm sure that that will go to other areas that are needy, like adult social care, children's services, etc., and that would be right too. But we've set out, as agreed in October, on the programme of transformation that the County Council agreed, which is about transforming the service and is not about cutting the service at all. I understand there has been a lot of counter-messaging around that, which may have been more effective than our messaging as well. That's the difficulty I think we have as a county council with a lot of our messages, I agree.
Quickly, Tina, and then we'll draw it to a close.
Very, very quick. It's just, again, to get over to the public, the incredible improvements in our fire engines. I mean, the technology now in our fire engines means that you only need 4 firefighters instead of 6 most of the time. And they even have these heat sensors that can tell where the fire started. Each one has that. And the other problem that the fire service has, which basically everybody has in Surrey, is we train everybody so well. But then, of course, they realise it's much cheaper to go and live in, I don't know, I mustn't offend anybody, but perhaps Norfolk, where housing is cheaper or whatever, and they're fully qualified firefighters, and they go off and become firefighters elsewhere.
I think it's really important to state that these proposals enabled us to meet the current risks that are emerging. We have many, many more tragic water deaths. We have lots more elderly, vulnerable people living alone in isolated situations, not always in deprived circumstances. But we have to be out there with our firefighters, using that capacity, which isn't utilised so much in the evening, in the daytime, to manage all of these risks. So this is really about having an optimum model, using our services and our resources as efficiently as we possibly can in order to meet the expectations of the public, of the taxpayer, of the inspectors and of Surrey County Council.
And I'm not going to make any comments on the specifics, simply to say to members that at the same time that this task force has been looking at this whole issue, I, over the last few months, have spoken to a number of public meetings in my division with residents, associations, parish councils, etc. And I'm guessing the total audiences of those meetings are about 200, so reasonably significant. And when I have explained the proposals, I have not had a single dissent from any resident. Part of the problem, and it's a problem of life, is that it is easier to criticise, particularly if you are a vested interest who feels that you might be losing out in some way, than it is to support proposals. And when I have explained the process that the Chief Fire Officer has gone through in consulting external professionals and other fire brigades and so on, and then the actual numbers involved in terms of the nighttime cover, and that's where you, Chairman, said quite rightly that was where there was concern, but that's where I think there's been mismessaging, bad messaging, put out by a lot of people who are just anti, for their own reasons. and explain the numbers involved, that the proposals actually have a higher number of fire engines after these proposals come into, if they come into effect, than the external sort of advisors have recommended. And people have said, oh, okay. And the key thing is, to stop fires happening in the first place, you need the staff to go out and do the prevention visits. And if I'd mention one thing that hasn't come up today, and that is, I was very impressed when the Chief Fire Officer at a meeting a few weeks ago talked about those fire officers who are in their careers coming up to the time that they are looking at retirement. And at the moment, there is a binary option. You either pass the medical and continue as a fit firefighting officer, or you retire. There is nothing in between. And if we can get more of those officers experienced for many, many years, who don't want to retire, but they want to contribute to the service, to be able to go out and offer their real advice and experience to people in terms of prevention, that's a win for everybody.
Thank you, Keith. And, a very powerful point there. Colleagues, I'm sure Saj and Tina have listened very carefully, as well as participating in discussion, because our action is really on them now. It is key for this transformation, fire transformation task, whatever we call it, working group, to add value, that you yourselves as a panel address kind of the issues that we've talking to Steve Owen Hughes and Denise, that you come up with your own conclusions, so that when we meet, before it goes to Cabinet, we have a kind of similar discussion, but it's on the basis of what our own group has recommended. So I would commend, I'm sure other colleagues, to commend your group to be very specific and very rigorous, where you agree with the strategy, where you think it's absolutely right, also where you think it might be tweaked or whatever. It's not for us now to draw your own conclusions. But if we are going to have a good discussion, a robust discussion, next time, before anything goes to Cabinet, it really is imperative, not to put any pressure on you guys, that you come back with a really rigorous report that we can address and then send on to the Cabinet. So the recommendation suggested to colleagues is that this committee acknowledge the progress of the Fire Transformation Work Group in undertaking its review, and urges it or supports it coming back to this committee in September with a full and detailed findings and recommendations. And I think we can, and then which we will then, as a committee, review and then send on to Cabinet. Is that okay? Yeah.
Chairman, can I just make one reservation? Since I said the actual group has changed now because of the change of committee, if anybody wants to come forward and add some value to it, I'll willingly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve, Denise, and we'll let Jason go now. Okay, thanks very much. And Tina, very much. Right, we're running slightly behind time, but not desperately. So we now move on to the Forward Work Programme. And this is at this point, members watching it, people watching at home won't know what we're talking about, but everybody in this room does, about the possibility, at least, of adding to the work programme a formal recommendation that, following the request by the Leader of the Council and others to establish a task group, we'll call a call to action on green, clean and safe. We can have the discussion again, that's entirely up to members, but I think in the interest of transparency we should put that suggestion to the committee for approval or not. And we can have the debate again, that's up to you, or simply bear in mind we did have a full discussion this morning that we agree or disagree with it. But the floor is yours. Anyone want to add anything, or should we just go to the vote? I'm sorry you weren't there, Jonathan.
Sorry, apologies I wasn't here this morning. Just in the same way we've renamed this group from places, I think, on your suggestion, to something that does what it says on the tin. I don't think clean, green and safe communities really means very much. And maybe we might have a name that reflects actually what we're going to do.
It's fine. I mean, absolutely. You weren't here. We went through, the environment and climate change, just climate change. I'm for whatever works. We don't get too bogged down. Although I know the name is important, but it's what this group will do, and we'll keep it simple. Absolutely. Shall we just formally register whether we want to establish the group? I propose that we do. All those in favour? Yeah. Those against? John is abstaining. Okay, fair enough.
I'm abstaining, but I would like the notes of our discussion about it this morning and the reason why I'm abstaining, because just by saying I'm abstaining doesn't give any information as to clue as to why I disagree that it should be one that we approach now.
Fair point. Just to ask who moved. I mean, presumably notes of our discussions this morning will be circulated. Okay. I think that addresses John's reasonable concern. On the forward work programme itself, Mike.
Just a couple of ideas as such. Could we discuss the 20 mile per hour policy as to where we see it, because it seems a bit bitty. I don't want to go into any more detail, but there's some areas who think they might get it, might not get it. I just wondered if we could just tidy it up. The next one is, I know the electric fire engine has gone back, but let's have that one back to Germany or wherever it is. Can we have a full report on whether it was a success or not, and what we're going to do? Are we ordering any more, or how does it affect the whole of the council? But in particular, where's it gone? I mean, I know it's gone back, but what happened?
Might be.
Well, I don't mind if you do it another day, but I got one more.
We hadn't acquired it. We hadn't purchased it. It was just a demo. It was a demonstration. So obviously, they haven't evaluated it. Once it's evaluated, then it'll come back to us.
What's the evaluation?
Well,
I mean, I'm not asking now. I'm just asking if we put on for the whole policy of electric vehicles would be quite useful.
Well, whomever will take this offline, we'll try and find an answer to you.
The last one would be, you could take this offline, I don't know whether it should be heard. If the Reigate property was to be sold off, which it evidently would be, is the money likely to be put back into the fire service for improvements?
I have no idea. Again, maybe that's there may be ways of doing it out with the committee. I think, as we agreed this morning, and I think it's sensible that we tend to focus our view on Surrey-wide issues rather than specific items, however important they are to individual divisions. Otherwise, we'll get nowhere. As far as the 20 mile an hour policy, which would affect Surrey, I think that is something that maybe we should at least begin to investigate.
The 20 mile an hour road policy takes effect through the speed policy that we currently have as a council. If you're going to review 20 miles per hour in isolation, you'd have to review the entire policy, and that would have to come from Cabinet as to whether or not they consider it to be an immediate thing. It's too small in the larger context to take and deal with it in isolation.
Fiona, then.
Chairman, going back to the task groups, I think we have agreed the clean, green and safe, so that's fine. That leaves us with one more task group that we can set up.
Yes, we don't have, got, as I understand, we've got some outgoing task groups, like the fire working one and others. As far as specifically establishing another task group to go with the environment, climate change task group, I don't think we have to do that today. Because there's nothing to base, we've not had a long discussion about something that needs further investigation. So my suggestion would be that we take that in September.
That's fine, Chairman, but can I then suggest something that we might need to look and see whether we can add to? And that's something that John raised this morning, which is this Council's assets policy. Because I think that was raised you're right, we haven't got the detail that shows whether or not we can add value to it, but I'd like to put that on the agenda for discussion.
I think that's a very meaty item, which I think we should investigate. Okay. Becky.
I'm not sure whether these would come under our new Clean, Green and Safe task group, but I'm going to throw in there pollution outside schools, whether there's something we can do across Surrey, some policies we can bring in, signage and whatever. And the other one is, again, I don't know where it falls in the council, just whether we want to look at and consider the impact of the airport expansions like Heathrow, Gatwick and Biggin Hill and other small airports, just the impact that they have. They're not necessarily in our county, but they all impact our county. And I'm only thinking of it because we've got a few very live consultations at the moment, like Heathrow. Gatwick's coming online. Biggin Hill has just launched one as well. They're all fighting over the same airspace, and it all affects us. But it might not be the right place. So
my suggestion would be two excellent suggestions. That when we'll call it the Climate Change Task Group for the moment, when it meets very soon under Andy's chairmanship to see its terms of reference, and we'll explore whether either or both of those might come in under its remit. If they don't, maybe we have another discussion about, certainly on the latter one, whether it's something that this committee might want to take forward in a more structured and rigorous way. Is that helpful? Keith?
Could I just ask if the outcome of the review into the countryside strategy, which has been going on for some little while, and I believe is due to sort of culminate in a strategy, will that come back to us at some point as part of the work programme to review what has been decided, how it's going in any way?
So that is, and we're still in public session, so I may be incorrect. That I think that that specific piece of work, which I know you and Jonathan have been involved in, is kind of subsumed into the work on the climate and environment change. And we know the strategy is not being published yet. I think it may be one. I think, as Jonathan argued, that it should be only a part of a suite of policies, not a standalone thing. And I believe, though I can't absolutely confirm, that that's been taken on board by Mike and the others. So, but in the event, yes, it will come back, but I'm not sure when and in what form.
Perhaps Hugh might be able to circulate a note to us, just letting us know the status of that and where it's got to.
Oh, John, yeah.
My name is John. Looking at the forward work programme, in September, Waste Task Group coming back for final, Surrey Fire and Rescue coming back for a final, Fire Transformation coming back for a final. No argument about those at all. On-street parking policy update. Whose suggestion was that? And before you answer that, you then go to November, and you mentioned the fact that investment commercial strategy, including assets, there are 4 meaty items coming up there, 2 of which we will have covered in some detail, the waste and the fire improvement. We will have seen no sight of the asset and place strategy, highways, transport, environment, transformation. At the very least, I think we should ask for a briefing update of where they are, so that we have a notification as to what it is they're doing, where they're at, and when they expect to have some detail. Fiona mentioned the investments and the assets. That's the one I brought up, and I believe that should be the other working group. And I do believe, because it is very much something that will benefit this council, it has been related and spoken to at full council, that one of the ways forward is we will deal with our property and assets. And we haven't done in the past. The sooner we start on that meaty chunk, the better. Because it's not going anywhere when you consider that last October it started to look at things. We were due to have a report in March of this year. It didn't happen. We had a plan and a diagram of how it would be gathered together and collated. But nothing's come out that we can actually look at. And to bring it blind to a meeting in November without a briefing note, Because if we'd be talking about a paper coming to us 5 or 10 days before the meeting. And that's insufficient time for those two major items, in my view. Of the two, and one is the highways issues itself, because it's coming up to a new contract with Kier. That needs to be in our minds. And again, assets and strategy, property.
That's fair points, and we'll definitely take that on board. Huma reminds me that the chairs and vice group chairs are meeting on Thursday, all of us, and I'm pretty sure that much of what you've already said is on the agenda. What I commit to do is raise that at that meeting, if it isn't, and send a note round to the committee. Your points are well taken, John.
Okay.
Could add something, Mr. Chairman. There was a task group in existence reviewing the care contract, which I happen to be on. And I'm not sure if that's still going now within the new environment, so perhaps we need to check that out if it's going to continue to meet.
There is, inevitably, as from the end of the previous committees and the new system, there's going to be some parallel working for a little while, but hopefully within weeks and certainly months, one will end and the other take over. But bear with us that for a time there may be, and there's all the task groups don't forget are volunteers. There may be technically more than one task group going on as one that is those that have been completed under, say, the old Environment Committee or the old Place Committee or whatever it's called. Whatever the highways related one, draw together. So again, I would just appeal or just urge just a little bit of patience till the system finishes itself. That's a jargon of language. We're getting there, and the important thing is that we have for this committee, two major pieces of work. One we've already agreed on, the environment. The other, I'm sure we will agree on, relates to our assets and transformation. It's just the process of bearing where we are now to where we will be, hopefully in the summer, to be able to progress that in a sensible way. We can go on as long as you want, but it's 3:15.
Okay. I agree with John and Fiona on the assets. I think if we're going to have an asset strategy, at the moment it seems very much led by property. But it's the community and the environment that will be the benefit for that. So I think it naturally that we would have a scrutiny role here. I also like Mike's idea about 20 miles an hour. It feels like local committees have been starved of capital funding for things like your level crossings, your small improvements locally, what you call I think the ITS schemes, the integrated, getting the transport to work together locally, and to revisit what our strategy should be there and what the level of spending we need to have in our local committees, because at the moment it feels like they've been castrated somewhat. And maybe we can't do both. I really support the place and asset one, but I think that there might be value in coming back to local transport and how it links to local committees at some point.
We'll try and, absolutely. We'll take this on board. We'll try and focus it in something that is meaningful and digestible, bearing in mind we mustn't have overreach. We have to prioritise, and some of the stuff that we'd like to do, we may just physically not be able to do that. But we'll try our best. Okay? Meeting closed at 17 minutes past.